a wrap of how things have been. And I guess it is to no surprise that we are actually the worst performing market in ASEAN for the year-to-date period. As of the day that I did this presentation, we were down 8.6%, but Marvin had just mentioned because of the bloodbath today, we're down more than 12%. And you can see that, again, um, in some ways, it's not surprising because we were one of the worst hit by COVID-19 despite having the strictest lockdown. So this was as of July 27. So that's just a few days ago. And, vaccination rates are also the slowest. So far, only 10% have received their first dose of the vaccine versus the other countries in ASEAN, which are doing much better than us, except for Vietnam. But then if you think about it, Vietnam actually has a low rate of COVID-19 infections. So anyway, aside from that, on the economic front, we are also one of the slowest in terms of recovery. I was kind of surprised to see that actually, except for Thailand, all other countries are going to be back to pre-pandemic level and even higher. I mean, Vietnam will, by this year, be 9.6% above pre-pandemic level, followed by Indonesia and Singapore. Okay, so we're down there together with Thailand. And of course, during the start of the year, one of the things I noticed was that we actually have a local inflation, which is higher than everybody else. So, I mean, if I were a foreign fund manager, it's just so easy to be bearish about the Philippines, which is actually what they've been doing since the start of the year, selling the local market. And of course, right now, very fresh is that there is a possibility that we will have another round of infections. So you can see from here that, the 7-day infection rates have picked up for the whole country and NCR also. And because of that, our government has already announced that we will have a shift from GCQ to an ECQ, which in some ways is surprising and is the main reason why the market was sold down by so much today. So anyway, I would just like to say that I remain optimistic. Actually, we remain optimistic at COL Financial, and it may seem a bit controversial, but let me just share to you why our view is that way. First of all, of course, inflation has peaked, but then again, I guess at this point, you don't really care about inflation anymore. Second, and most importantly, is the efficient vaccination efforts, which may be a little bit controversial, but let me explain it a little bit more later. Next is the recovery of corporate earnings, which again is raising eyebrows probably among you. And finally, valuations. Okay, so as you can see, inflation has peaked. The dark blue line is food inflation. The light blue one is transportation. We've already seen the worst. For food, of course, we know it was the African swine fever that caused prices of pork to go up substantially. And of course, the floods in the fourth quarter of last year. So now we've addressed those problems and they're on the way down. Okay, so now let's move on to the more controversial topic, the Delta variant and the vaccinations. So, notwithstanding the fact that we have only vaccinated 10% of the population in terms of the first dose, I feel that the government is actually doing a good job. Okay, because what do you do in a situation where you only have a limited supply of vaccines? So you adopt a Pareto principle where you focus on the 20% that will address 80% of the problems. So if I were the government, I would address the high-risk groups, and that would be the older population. So this is cases by demographics in terms of Philippines, the number of infections. So you can see that Filipinos over the age of 50 account for 82% of all deaths in the country, despite the fact that only 26% of all COVID-19 cases come from this age group. So of course, we know the A1, A2, A3 classification. They're focusing first on the health workers that are exposed to the COVID-19 patients. Second, the A2 classification, which are the seniors or the older ones, and then A3, which would be those with comorbidities, because studies have also shown they are at higher risk of severe COVID and hospitalizations and deaths. And finally, A4, because people who go to work are more exposed to the virus. So in that respect, I think the government is doing a good job. And secondly, they also said that they're focused on NCR plus. Okay, and I think that is also a good idea, because I got the population of NCR plus. As you can see here, the population of NCR plus is actually 34% of the total population of the whole country. Okay, 37 million. But if you look at the total number of cases of COVID, NCR plus, despite accounting for only 34% of the country's total population, they account for 62% of the total COVID-19 cases. So again, if you only have so much vaccines available, of course, you want to focus your effort where there is massive infections happening. And of course, if I want to vaccinate 70% of this 37 million, I only have to think about 26 million people. And to fully vaccinate 26 million people, I only need 52 million doses. So in my opinion, it's a lot easier to focus on vaccinating these 26 million people rather than focusing on the whole 110 million population of the Philippines. And, aside from that, I think, it's more efficient because it will allow us to reduce deaths and boost economic growth. Okay, so this is as of July 5. Although the headline number says, for example, as of today, we vaccinated, say, 10% of the population receiving first dose. But if you look at this, for example, NCR, and this was as of July 5, almost a month ago, 26% of the population of NCR already got their first dose, and 8.7% already got fully vaccinated. And then, of course, we did the survey today. And as you can see, almost all of the attendees, or at least 55%, are fully vaccinated. And a lot more have received the first dose and are signed up. So, only 4% are still undecided. So that said, I think we can reach herd immunity. And in fact, if you think about it, I read a newspaper report today that said that the government is already hitting 500,000 doses a day in terms of vaccinations, because the supplies are already coming. Anyway, going to the NCR plus, another positive positive consequence of prioritizing NCR plus is that, NCR plus the regions where these +8 areas belong to account for 68.5% of GDP. So if you're vaccinating these areas already and, opening up these economies by December, then of course you can address the problems already. And, I'm happy to note that the government said that it has procured enough vaccines to cover 71% of the population. Okay. And that said, there is hope that we will reopen by Christmas and we will have a normal Christmas, NCR plus. And although I guess a lot of you probably hate Okta research today, but if you think about it, in some ways they are objective, because they said that it is possible for actually NCR plus to reach herd immunity by Christmas and for us to have like a normal December now. So anyway, so I think what's new right now is the Delta variant. So finally, we know that Delta variant is here, and it's more transmissible. It will lead to an increasing number of cases. But I think, as Zach had mentioned earlier, the UK is a great case study, because as you can see here, the number of cases in the UK have been going up. And this is ahead of their quote unquote Freedom Day, where they drop all COVID-19 restrictions. But, rather than focus on the cases, which is actually what we're doing right now, the UK is focusing on the deaths. Because the UK actually has one of the highest vaccination rates. They have 69% vaccinated, and then this is probably, again, similar to us, focused on those with comorbidities and the older age. So even though the people are getting COVID, they're not dying anymore, because those that are getting sick are those who are younger and are less at risk of dying. No? So because the deaths have been going down, even with increasing cases, the UK has decided to maintain, their policies, uh, to move on with their Freedom Day. Same thing in the US, we see cases going up, but the number of deaths going down. Therefore, they're not imposing new economic restrictions. Okay. So they are encouraging more people to get vaccinated. That is true, but at least they don't have to um, enter into new quarantines or to close down the economy again. Okay. So that makes me optimistic, because assuming that we do hit herd immunity, at least in the NCR plus, we can open 68% of the economy. And we may see a surge. We may see more cases, but at least if less people die, maybe the government can treat it like a common flu or a bad flu. And, just, prompt people to maybe be vaccinated or stay at home and rest, and not have to close the economy or enter into another ECQ again. So I think one of the risks that were highlighted in the surveys is the risk of a potential credit ratings downgrade by the ratings agencies such as Fitch, which had mentioned that it downgraded the outlook of the Philippines credit rating to negative. I just want to say that if we address COVID-19 and are able to boost economic growth, we should address the issues affecting our credit rating, because as you can see, because the economic growth was so bad last year, our budget fell to a negative 9%, because of course the government could not generate any taxes with the economy so weak, and because of that we had to borrow more money, so our debt to GDP ballooned to 54.5. But of course, if the economy recovers, this budget deficits should go down again, and the debt to GDP should return on a downward path. And because of that, we will not have to suffer from credit ratings downgrade. Okay, and another thing I would like to highlight is that, in the first quarter, our earnings growth, our corporate earnings growth was actually very good, which, to some extent, I was also surprised, because I thought the first quarter would still be very bad, because remember, first quarter of last year, we did not have a lockdown yet. But that said, you will notice that a lot of the companies were able to register growth, except for the properties, which of course suffered from lower occupancy rates of the malls and lower rental rates. No. So anyway, the reasons why the companies were able to cope was because they adopted cost-cutting measures. They benefited from the CREATE law. Because of the CREATE law, the tax rate fell from 30% to 25%. And for the banks, they're actually saying that the NPLs are not as bad as it seems, or as they thought it would be. So they're setting aside less provisions. Okay, and finally, valuations. Valuations of stocks, in my opinion, are very cheap right now. It might not be obvious here because we're just at the middle part of the PE band, of the 10-year PE band. But again, I always share this one. If you look at the breakdown of the index stocks, you will notice that it is just being pulled up by a few index heavyweights like SM Prime, JG Summit. But if you look at the rest of the listed stocks, there's so many cheap stocks. So in other words, the people are not really, or investors are not really excited about the Philippines. So, there's no froth or bubble to speak of at this stage. Okay. And, foreign investors have exited heavily. They're heavily underinvested already in the Philippines. They've been consistent sellers since the middle of 2019. And, this is not, actually, I admit this is not the best way to measure um, the foreign investor participation in the Philippines. But, I mean, if you look at this crude measure, you will see that they're back to 2010 levels. And that's like the beginning of the recovery from the global financial crisis. So all the investors who came in since the global financial crisis have all left, essentially. So anyway, so before I share my slide on my stock picks, I just want to share with you that there is hope, even with the Delta variant. And this is another case that is interesting because if you look at it, it's India. When the number of cases shot up from around 11,000 a day to 400,000, that's like 40 times. No, the market just went down by 8.5%. But as soon as the number of cases went down, their market has gone up, and it's now back to a new 52-week high, or actually a new high for the year 2021. And as you can see, this only took around 2 months. Okay. So here are my stock picks. Every month I come out with a calling the shots report. So this month I don't have one because I have my market outlook. But anyway, you can read more about why I like these stocks, and later I think we'll be talking about it. I just want to highlight some new stock picks. For example, for the resilient companies, I've decided to add Pure Gold because, when I was doing an analysis of the list of stocks that we covered, and I was looking for companies that will be able to deliver earnings this year that are at par with pre-pandemic level or higher. Pure Gold was one of those companies, but then when I look at the share price, it was still at a discount. So I was kind of surprised about that, which is why I decided to add it, because it is a resilient company. And especially if you're worried about Delta variant, it should be resilient to it because people will still buy products from the groceries. And the fact that they have SNR, which is benefiting from this K-shaped economic recovery, is a plus for them. And another stock that I would like to highlight is PhilREIT. It's right now you can subscribe to the stock through PSEEC. I am recommending a shift away from A-REIT into PhilREIT because both of them have good assets. PhilREIT also has good assets, but the main difference is the dividend yield, because as you can see, the dividend yield of PhilREIT is 6.6%, whereas A-REIT's dividend yield for 2022 is only 5.2%. So I feel that it is a good time to shift to PhilREIT. Okay, so there is, of course, I'm sure you're aware, new wave of infections, which is what people are anticipating right now. Delays in vaccine procurement, because I think the recovery is largely dependent on vaccine supplies and vaccination of Filipinos. And the Fed rate hikes and ratings downgrade. Okay, so in summary, the Philippine market has underperformed most of Asia due to the country's poor management of the COVID-19 pandemic, rising inflation, and our slower economic recovery. However, we remain optimistic about the stock market as inflation is now under control, and we're already ramping up our vaccination efforts, and the focus on vulnerable groups and NCR Plus should help us reduce deaths and help our economy recover faster, allowing the country to avoid a ratings downgrade. And corporate earnings are also recovering despite the ongoing crisis, while the valuations of stocks are still cheap, with most trading significantly below their 10-year historical average PEs. So before I end my presentation, I'd just like to leave you with a quote Actually, I have two quotes for today. So my first quote is from Warren Buffett, who is the chairman of Berkshire Hathaway. So he said that the stock market is a device to transfer money from the impatient to the patient. Okay, and my second quote is from Benjamin Graham, who is the father of value investing. In the short run, the market is a voting machine, but in the long run, it is a weighing machine.